Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 308, Widows Unfiltered, an interview with Jo Kleinsorge.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. So I just did my interview with Jo, and I come back and then I record the intro later, and I think you're really going to get a lot out of it. It's really cool to me. Jo and I talked about this after we were done, but we had turned the recording off. It's really cool to me to have what feels like a two full circle moment to see how Jo got hope from listening to someone else's interview on the Widowed Mom podcast, which gave her the inspiration that she could be happy again and could be okay, and then is now on the podcast paying that back. It's like makes me teary just thinking about it. So cool that I get to be part of the ripple effect of this work. Yeah. So with that, I am excited to introduce you to just a powerhouse of a woman who's very honest and vulnerable. And I hope you'll get so much out of my interview with Jo. Okay, welcome, Jo. I'm glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
It's weird that we, yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Glad in a very weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of surprising sometimes when I'm thinking about who do I want to have on the podcast, and then a name pops up and I'm like, wait, why have I not had Jo on the podcast yet? You know? So I'm glad we're doing this. Okay. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you start by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got here.
Okay. Well, my name is Jo. Obviously, I live in Southwest Missouri. So I've had kind of an interesting childhood growing up between Los Angeles and Kansas, but eventually actually ended up marrying my high school sweetheart. So been together with my husband since I was, I believe 17 years old. So,
Wow.
well over half of my lifespan. And obviously came to your program because unfortunately I lost my husband almost 2 years ago, exactly 2 years this month. Lost him to suicide. And, you know, talk about pulling the rug right out from under your entire life, because I say on surface, but it's not on surface. It really was reality, at least as far as we knew, that, we had a pretty damn ideal life. High school sweethearts, financially stable, healthy kids, traveled the world, great friends, and so everything was good and we genuinely are happy. So it's hard to talk about sometimes because you want to be honest, and yet, we are happy, and yet there's obviously something going on that we don't recognize. And so literally my life within 30 minutes to an hour was completely pulled out, shaken up, and thrown all over the ground is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
So yeah, became a widow with no forewarning, and started my search for some sort of support out there to try and move on and know that I would have a life again, because that's hard to believe in the beginning.
What types of support did you try? What worked? What didn't?
I am a very proactive person. And so thankfully, the first few weeks, honestly, I was just in shock. They're hard to even remember the details, and fortunately had amazing friends and community and my real estate team, that just the personal support and letting them show up and sit with me, but not feeling like anybody really understood. And especially with the suicide, I was pretty open about it, and I don't know why. I just, for some reason, I didn't want to hide it, because I felt like my husband must have been suffering in a way I didn't understand. And to to continue to hide it, to me, wasn't doing anybody any good. But at first it was just having friends and family and allowing them in. And I'm very fortunate that that was the case, because suicide comes with a lot of blame, self-blame, and then blame from friends, blames from community, family, just looking for some sort of explanation to something that has absolutely no explanation. Um, I did search, and I truthfully was a little disappointed that it was very difficult to find any kind of support. I don't live in a big community. I live in Southwest Missouri, not far from where you are in Wichita. But even just regular grief support, I had a really hard time finding. In fact, really didn't. And I can't say for a fact it's not there, but I didn't find it easily. And certainly no suicide loss support. Thankfully, I did come across a local group, American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and a local advocate that I connected with. And so I was able to get kind of at least the feeling that I wasn't the only person. Unfortunately, I had known somebody at work that lost their son to suicide. And, by the grace of God, she reached out to me and put me in contact with this lady. And so that helped a lot, but it kind of pointed out this huge void of loss survivors and how they feel like they're drowning. And I did come across a support group via Zoom in Kansas City, so that was wonderful. But I found after a few months that it was met my need, that I needed to know people had survived this and were actually living productive lives and enjoying life, because I couldn't see how that could happen. But I also began to feel like every week I was tuning in and reliving the most horrible day of my life. And I wasn't learning what was going to be next. I was just processing, which I think is very important. But I came to a point where the emotions were overwhelming and I needed help learning what I was going to do with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened then?
My natural personality is just search, search, search. So I had come across a couple of books that I was very grateful, because in the beginning, I could hardly leave the house. I was fortunate to have an amazing real estate team that I just hold up. And I did come across a book by Jennifer Ashton, who told her story of surviving the loss of her husband. And I think Charlotte Maya, Sushi Tuesdays. So again, those were just some kind of proof of life that I could do at home, that these women had made it. And searching online, I actually came across a podcast by Sherry Metzler, who was an MGO.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
we were just talking yesterday.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, those are the things, and that's the reason I agreed to this, because I think those people never know what impact they did have, because her podcast was my first true proof of life. I could see myself in her. Suicide comes with so much stigma, and what was going on in their house, or what was really happening, or what did she say or he do and didn't do, and what was in their bank account, that you just feel this weight of everything, and you're making those stories up yourself. But her story was very relatable to mine, in that she had a great life, she had a great family, a wonderful long marriage. There is no stigma out there. There's no cause of this. It just happened. And even though she was by no way cured, she'll never be cured, I could see that she was further along. And I could see that this does happen to everyday people of all walks of life. There is no cause of this to be pinpointed and blamed. And I could see that she was working on herself. And so it gave me hope that I could do the same. And along with, God bless, the just local widows that had reached out to me more, in my local community, who had lost their husbands, that were just my first of, you're not going to believe it, but you are going to survive it. But yeah, Sherry's was the first suicide loss that I really saw as a mirror I could really
Uh-huh.
relate to. And so that led me to finding your website and podcast and listening to those.
So had
And
you like specifically searched for podcasts with related to suicide loss
I think
and
at that point, yes, that's
okay.
exactly what I was searching for. I come
Yeah.
up on some widow podcast, was extremely helpful, but there's still almost this feeling of, and those are the stories, we tell ourselves that mine's different.
Yeah, but it is
Um,
different. I mean, in so many ways it is
mhm.
different.
It is, it definitely feels different. And society definitely makes us feel it's different, that there's some kind of um, choice in this, that
Yeah.
somehow they caused this or somebody caused this. So
Can
it's
can you talk more about that? Like
Mhm.
how did you feel? What were the messages you received? What was that stigma like for you?
Thankfully, I will always feel blessed to be in the community that I was in. Um, and I'm sure there were things that maybe were spoken that I never heard, but I think I was extremely fortunate, because I know many that are not, that who have been the direct attack of innuendos and accusations. I was never subjected to that. My community was extremely supportive, my friends, his family, everybody. So, but you still have this, you grew up with your whole life, this
Hmm.
feeling of, well, strong women just suck it up. Real men are just able to make it happen. And so suicide is somehow a cop out. It's an intentional hurt. It's a failure. And you always look at it, and I'll be candid, I'm probably guilty of that too, of someone in the back of your head thinking, not necessarily, I never blamed another person, but the victim themselves thinking somewhat, well, what was wrong with them?
Hmm.
Why couldn't they just think their way out of this or talk their way out of this? And
Yeah.
I've come to realize there was something wrong, but no different than somebody who's got cancer or heart disease or
Hmm.
diabetes. Their brain was not functioning correctly.
Yeah.
But we are conditioned to think of suicide death not the same as other deaths, that it's
Hmm.
somehow optional.
Yeah.
um,
I think it's so important what you're saying is like, even if you didn't hear it directly from someone else that said, mean things, insensitive
right,
things, untrue things, still growing up and being in a culture that says those things and has those stigmas about suicide then means we can internalize it.
yes,
And then we can take those same, that same awful stigmatization and kind of use it against ourselves unknowingly.
absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what we do. I think the one thing about suicide loss survivors is they go on this quest to find proof of what was wrong. And,
Hmm.
David Kessler, he's been an amazing counselor too. And one of the things I heard in his that was helpful was that, suicide is the proof that was something wrong. It's not,
Mm.
nobody caused
Mm.
their loved ones cancer. Nobody caused their loved ones diabetes.
Mm.
Nobody caused, certainly how we talk to people impacts people's emotional feelings. But at the end of the day, you know, you're searching for some sort of proof to feel safe that there was
Yes.
something wrong, because it's like, especially like I said, for me, it was black and white. We had no mental health diagnosis. We had no
Right.
impending health doom, financial crisis. And so your brain is very much just wanting to make sense of the senseless. And
Yeah, I heard it explained this way. Tell me if this resonates with you, because it resonated with me kind of for a different reason. But the idea being that in large part, we draw safety from understanding the timeline of the
yeah,
events of our lives. And then when something like this happens that catches us by surprise and doesn't make sense, it's like the file cabinet where we would go in our brain, essentially the hippocampus, where we would go in our brain to find that timeline. It's like somebody took that whole file cabinet and threw it upside down on the floor. And now all the files are messed up and not sequential, and it doesn't make sense. And so where we would go to find safety now no longer feels safe.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you're describing is that process of wanting to go back through and put it all together so that you can make sense of it and so that you can feel safe about it, because your experience of it doesn't match what just happened.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's there's no logic. There's no reasoning. And especially, that's naturally my personality as a logical thinker, a planner. And so you're searching through everything, the
it's like safety
last
seeking.
ways, the last minutes, the last words, since high school, since college, since, looking for what did I miss? What was the thing that I missed? And it really creates a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And
did anybody help normalize that for you along the way? Like why you might be inclined to do that? At what point did you kind of realize, oh, this is a thing that happens and it's.
You did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly,
Oh, that's funny.
and I was a little frustrated that I could be what I consider a pretty intelligent, successful 50, at the time, probably 53-year-old woman, and not really comprehend how my brain processes and thinks of things. So honestly, I always bought into, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to your program, is, I always believed in coaching and proactive teachings.
That must be, is that a realtor thing?
It probably is.
I swear, every realtor I've ever worked with, especially Mom Goes On, already fans of coaching, already so into personal development and growth. And yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's sales, people that are entrepreneurs and salespeople. So that did not have to be, I did not have to be sold on that. I understood the value. I was a little intimidated by the group coaching just because of the vulnerability of, people knowing some of the most vulnerable emotions out there, because we talk about a lot.
Was that more because it was a suicide loss, or was that just general vulnerability in general?
Not necessarily the suicide itself, although there was a little bit of a feeling of, you worry that people will think that, well, her husband chose this, whereas mine, I had no choice, and so,
Gotcha.
But beyond that, I think it was just that I was very bought into, I was making a commitment to this, and I was going to be very open. And so when you are open, I think in any marriage of 35 years, regardless, but, especially, looking back, I'm thinking, oh, well, stuff that I thought was a midlife crisis, maybe that was a symptom, because he had become, a little more argumentative, defensive, unreliable. And so, you're going through this and you're talking with people candidly about being very angry. I mean, I was very angry. Rage is what drove me to, it was Father's Day, and being, just absolute rage at my husband and that the situation that he had put my kids in, our kids, and, being honest about those feelings and being, recorded saying, I am so angry at my husband. I just absolutely hate what he's done to us. Or, I feel like a failure as a wife and a mother because I didn't see this. I didn't fix it. I didn't prevent it. And, but it came to be that, that group dynamics is one of the greatest strengths of, people reflecting and being able to actually process their emotions, because they realize they're not
why
the
was
only
that
one.
for you? Okay, because seeing that you're not the only one.
I think you're not the only one, because when people really are honest, when you say, I feel like a failure because I didn't see this, I didn't prevent it, and everybody's hands go up. And it's not just the suicide widows, it's the cancer widow that I should have made him go to the doctor, the accident widow that why did I tell him to go to the store? And you start to see that these aren't you. You wouldn't say that about them. This is your brain. And that's kind of what I learned through your program, is this is your brain's just natural process of trying to make sense. And it's telling yourself a story to try and
Yeah.
feel safe, but that story isn't always to your benefit.
Yeah. No, that's no joke.
Yeah.
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 That's one of the things I love too about it is having had so many conversations with people one-on-one, we tend to doubt ourselves. We tend to make ourselves wrong.
Yeah.
And there's something so freeing about seeing the same struggle in other people that
Yeah.
allows us to go, oh, maybe this is just what grief is like. Maybe it's not a personal failing or a character flaw.
Yeah. You never want it for another person, but it does help you see that you wouldn't say these things about them. So are
Mm-hmm.
they true about you? Because your program talks a lot about, is that a fact? Is that a truth? Or is that something you're telling yourself? And then you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of see, oh, I can see how maybe that's not a fact, because I wouldn't say that about Wendy and her husband's death. I
Right.
wouldn't say that about, yeah. So then you're
Yes.
able to more easily pick those thoughts across
Mm-hmm.
apart.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, one of the things I like to ask, and I know it's such a blur sometimes and it's hard to remember, but sometimes people start listening to this podcast when they are in the early days of grief, and it's so super overwhelming and hard.
Yes.
If you could go back and you could talk to yourself really early on after this happened, what would you say? What advice would you give yourself? Maybe something you would, start doing, stop doing.
hmm
What would you
I,
say?
I think I would say, and I joined very early, like 2 months, 3 months by the time I got into the program
Mm-hmm.
after. And at times I wondered if it was too early, but I don't think it was. I was at a point where I was ready to start processing and
Mm-hmm.
I needed it. But I do remember, one thing that drew me to you, that when I heard this is not your new normal unless you choose for it to be, I was like, join. I mean,
Right.
immediately, because the thought of this being my new normal was the thing that was creating the most suffering for me.
Yeah.
Um, but then the other thing of it was, I'm sorry, what was your question? Say it
Just
again.
like, what would you go back and
Yeah,
tell that early version of yourself? What do you wish you knew then?
that's what, because your other phrase that really struck me was learning to love life again. And I
Mm-hmm.
literally remember thinking, well, I'm probably not going to love life again because my life is pretty damn perfect. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I kind of, how do you top that? But
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to feel like this the rest of my life. So it's worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I would go back and say, Joe, it is possible that you will love life. It might be a different version, um, but don't give up the thought that your best hope is just to survive and be an
Mm-hmm.
example for your kids.
Yeah.
That there is true enjoyment out there, because I
Mm-hmm.
did not believe
Yeah. No, and it's such a hard thing to believe, and it can almost be a little, I don't want to say insulting. That's not
yeah, you
exactly the word
almost
I'm
feel
looking
just
for, but
deceptive too,
yeah, it
that,
just feels
it's
like,
it's kind of betraying
yeah,
the relationship that you
right.
had.
Yeah.
Yeah, to think
Yeah.
that, oh well, it's kind of feels like, well, it's okay that they're gone because
Mm-hmm.
I get to go on and do this next thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not what it is at all. So your mind rejects that thought. And I very much rejected that thought, but also just wanted to be healthy so that my kids wouldn't suffer because I was suffering, is really
Mm-hmm.
it is really the mindset I came into the program with. And
Mm-hmm.
it did change over time that, you know, each human being deserves to be happy and healthy, and I could get there.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm a lot closer, but I also want people to know, obviously I'm doing great now, but when I joined your program, I mean, I was in a ball cap, holed up in the basement in tears and no hair, no makeup for months.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have those days occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
and you know what? Like just circling back to what you said, because I think it matters, is so what if in the beginning the steps that we take are for our kids or, you know, for whatever it is that can motivate us to get the support,
yeah,
it doesn't have to start with us wanting to love life again. It can just be like, okay, my dog needs me. I'm gonna,
yeah, yeah,
um, and so I think it's so good to have something that motivates you. And
that
yeah, and then
motivates
to
you.
be honest about that it isn't a linear Oh,
you know?
I started down here and now it's up here. So since so we're at the 2 year-ish mark,
Mm-hmm.
kind of how, when you zoom out and you think about the whole 2 years and what that's been like relative to what you knew of grief before or what you expected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that. How does it compare? How does it contrast?
Um, we're a very grief illiterate society, and I am
Amen.
100% guilty of that. I have
Yep.
been very fortunate to be, and I guess you say fortunate in some ways, maybe not, because now I do see this as a normal place in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. But I have a very healthy family. And so I really didn't have a lot of experience with grief, especially non-traditional grief,
Mm-hmm.
beyond just living to be 85, 90 years old and eventually deciding you don't want a certain, medication and just, going on. That was my experience of
Yeah.
grief very much. And so it was much easier to, you know, be publicly mourning and be in grief, for a month, 2 months, and then be like, okay, well, granddad, I'm going to go on
Mm-hmm.
and then miss you every now and then and on Halloween, your favorite holiday. But I had never had experience with something that's considered out of the norm,
Mm-hmm.
losing a husband younger in life and, people losing their children and all, and just trying to wrap your brain around the fact that it's not fair. Um,
Yeah.
but it's just life. And so how we tell ourselves life is supposed to be, I try to reframe that a little bit that, do I know for a fact Darren didn't live a full life? Um,
Mm.
he did have a lot of experiences. We had a lot of experiences that a lot of people never get, even if they live twice the time. Um, but it is like not minimizing people's grief anymore, not trying to I was very much a positive mindset person, and I've learned that positive mindset is different than um, truly changing your thoughts. So
Mm.
I would be the one that would want to fix somebody in grief, to
Yeah.
focus them on the positive, to, say, oh, but I'm sure you have great memories, and kind of not let them process the hard
Mm-hmm.
part, but try to get them to focus on the good part, which is great. But I think to be healthy, your brain does have to process the
Yeah.
sadness and the anger. And I was the person that did not want to let people do that. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
fix
Mm-hmm.
it, and you can't fix it.
So how do you think your own, because here's how I see you. I see you as you're this very accomplished, like go-getter.
Hmm.
I you're a doer, you get things done, you make it happen, like professional, high achiever,
Yeah,
right? If we
yeah.
yeah. So I'm wondering if you now, when you look back on what you have been through and what your grief experience is like, how did that kind of nature history as a high achiever, if you relate to that term,
Hmm.
impact the way that you approached grief? How was it helpful? Did it hold you back in certain ways? Can you talk about
I
that?
think the helpful was that I was willing to search out resources early
Mm-hmm.
on, to get help and feel like there had to be help rather than just thinking that I had to live in that. I think that was very much helpful. I think the flip side of that is there is almost a little bit of this survivor's guilt
Mm.
that, how dare you, you know, work to be happy? Um, how dare you still want to set goals or achieve things when,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't prevent this or you didn't make this available for your husband. So, part of it is that always, and also always believing that, when you work hard, the American dream. I mean, I didn't grow up in, affluence or anything. My husband and I worked very hard, set goals, did all the books and the manuals. And, when you do these things right and you get the things and then they're all taken away, it's hard to feel like you should do that again or that you deserve
Mm.
to do that again, because you did it and it didn't work because look where you are now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that flip side is a little bit of questioning it. The good side is that I think it brings you to resources because I hope that's one thing from this podcast. I hope everybody searches for their resource, because it is out
Yes.
there and it's
Yes.
such a lonely feeling. And I think it's all different. For me, I think coaching is one of the best because it is so proactive,
Hmm.
but I'm open to everything. And I think every survivor, find what works for you. If it's, you taught us tapping on just processing emotions, if it's EMDR, if it's therapy, if it's energy healing, if it's mediums, there's
Yep.
no judgment. How does your brain help you
Yes.
process this?
Yes. And can you be the authority on what works for you? And,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and not feel guilty about seeking it
Hmm.
and taking advantage of it.
Yes. I love that. What an amazing, I revel in this. So it happens several times a week where I'm just profoundly amazed by the way that we can connect with one another over the
Mhm.
internet, which I don't even really
Yeah,
understand, but like truly there's communities and pockets for every kind of loss, for every type of healing, if we
there is.
just look and are
And
open
I'm
to it.
so, even as society as a whole, sometimes I think the open, when people have a common thing like this, I am so impressed with sometimes just the way that people are so open to another person's perspective,
Hmm.
and because I very seldom see judgment, whether somebody believes in going to church for their healing, if somebody
Hmm.
believes in going to a medium or an energy healer. I think when somebody has been impacted by something so painful as loss of a spouse or a child, they really put down a lot of their judgment, and I think
Hmm.
that's great because to me, I don't care where somebody gets their healing. If it
Yes.
brings them peace, they deserve that.
Hmm.
And if we could do that as a society, we'd be much better off.
Amen. I agree with
But
you. Yeah.
but yeah, and there is, and what doesn't work for one, that's fine. Try something else. So I never want somebody to think that this helped me, so it has to help you. It may not.
Yeah, and
And going,
that's the
yeah,
only way we learn is if we just try stuff and we see, like, does this help me? And then, okay, if it doesn't, next.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And be willing to do that and not see it as this fear that, oh, it didn't work, so that means that I'm
Hmm.
broken and I'm never going to be happy again. It's
Hmm.
like, well, ask around and try something else. And
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
you're not comfortable with it, then don't do it. That's okay too.
Hmm. So since you've mentioned energy healers and mediums a
Mhm.
couple of times, is that, have you found help there? What
I
is that
have,
something?
I will do about anything. And yeah, and I personally, I just believe, and I love the combination, which is, I think, why I liked your program. I'm very where science and emotions and things match. And so,
Hmm.
I do believe, like with my husband and all, as far as just energy, that we're all, energy. The universe is
Hmm.
energy, and that energy converts. And so, there are times where I choose to believe that he is still part of my life,
Hmm.
because energetically he's still there, and I wouldn't be the person that I am. I wouldn't have the children. I wouldn't have the life that I have. And so,
Yeah.
therefore, I do like to feel kind of a spiritual attachment and an energetic attachment to him. I
Hmm.
realize that others, they don't believe in that. And in fact, some of them might think it's flat out wrong. And I'm okay with that too.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm open to that. But I tend to see how it processes in the brain, because I do think a lot of times it comes down to um, the thoughts, but it's providing evidence for your
Mm.
thoughts that you can wrap your head around and get peace out of. So if it brings somebody peace, I don't see there any harm in it. And if it doesn't
Hmm.
bring them peace, then do not do it. Um,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, and that's one thing with lost survivors too. With suicide, I don't see it as a choice. I feel like their brain malfunctioned. It's like somebody's heart malfunctions in a heart attack.
Hmm.
Um, you know, but there's other lost survivors that may need to feel like, they did choose this and they can leave it behind, and that brings them peace, and that's okay too. Um,
Yes. And
yeah,
I'm so glad you are saying that. Sometimes I feel, as a coach, what people are looking for me sometimes is to tell them
yeah,
what to think or what to do. And what I love about what you're saying is that, yes, try the things, But also use your power of discernment. Like, know what helps you. What if it moves you toward what you want, it works for you. If it moves you away from what you want, it doesn't work for you. And that might be totally different for you versus the woman next to you.
Yeah. And
Nobody's right or
that's
wrong.
how I try to approach, and it is through your training too, because something I work very much on is this thought bringing you closer to what the life you want or
Mm-hmm.
further away? Because if it's
Yeah.
causing you pain and moving you further away, then you can try to pick away at it and change that thought. And so when people are obviously suffering, we'll see them in, Facebook groups and all very early on. And, I'll try to approach it as, this is a thought that I find helpful. You might try it
Mm-hmm.
on. And if you don't find it helpful, that's okay. There's, no judgment, no
Totally.
hurt feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. Acceptance and commitment training.
Yeah.
It's one of their,
I
main
remember
main
making a
principles.
post around Father's Day about how angry I was with
Mm-hmm.
my husband and, doing this to us. And, it very much upset somebody that,
Mm.
you can't be angry with him. He didn't do this. He didn't cause this. And I understand her perspective now. I
Mm.
did say that, you know what, but I am angry and I'm not going to ignore that. And I
Yeah.
understand if you don't like that, that's okay, but
Was this
right now I'm angry.
someone you knew in your life or someone in
No,
a
it
widow
was
group?
and it was in a suicide support group. So I understand
Oh.
how to them that probably, they're not wanting to hold that anger towards their loved one. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was probably, touched on them. But
Mm-hmm.
I do still have anger. I've been able to, in my mind, and it's taken a long time to get there, and there are days I don't get there, but I choose to look at it as I am very angry at his actions. There's no doubt that his actions have caused a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't believe his actions were his decision or his choice because I don't think his brain was in a place at that moment to allow for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very much his actions. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I have to let that be where it is, but I can
Yeah.
separate that from what I believe is his soul and what his intentions are for his desires are for his family.
Yeah. And for you, when you're feeling angry, and I'm imagining this other person too, right? The amount of suffering that probably gets created when we tell ourselves we shouldn't be angry, but
Right.
yet we're feeling anger.
Mhm.
Oof.
Yeah. And I use your coaching because I will say to myself, of course you're angry. A wife and a mother who life was turned upside down feels angry, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And rather than fighting it and letting it go on for hours and days, it will go because, sure enough, 30 minutes, an hour later, and I'll be able to go. And, it's not fair, but who's to say it's fair that I have this beautiful home and this wonderful
Mm-hmm.
community? So
Yeah. What does fairness
I'm
even have to
also
do with it
thankful
anyway?
for that. I'm angry at his actions and I'm thankful for the life we built together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, back to the 2-ish year.
Hmm.
What is life like for you now? What are you working on next? What feels like maybe the next growth edge for you, either in your grief or just generally speaking?
Um, it's hard. I have done so much, and at times when I question myself, I do have to sit back and look, the gap in the game because I want to check off all the boxes and be healed and
Mm-hmm.
put a little bow on everything. Um, but I've done a lot on my own, finished a lot of projects, and I still have a major project that Darren and I had started that I'm
Mm-hmm.
completing now, which is a remodel of an investment property. Um, and so I'm working on that. Um, you've helped me a lot with not trying to future cast things so much and
Mm.
just, make a decision day by day because I did create um, a lot of overwhelm for myself trying to lay out the future plan of everything
Mm.
and finally came to the point where financially, I can take it day by day. So, I'll make those decisions as they come along. So I'm finishing that investment property. Um, if it plays out the way I see, I would like for it to be some sort of center that can, provide space for support groups and healing
Yeah.
groups and of all different types and natures. And maybe it will and maybe it won't. So I'll see when it's
Mm-hmm.
done how it plays out. But I'm kind of doing that. So I've learned that I've always been a very strong person. I think that comes from my mother and my family. So I never questioned my abilities to do things, but I very much questioned my true enjoyment of
Mm.
activities in life. And I am enjoying life. I'd
Mm-hmm.
say it's kind of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time
Mm-hmm.
I generally enjoy time with friends and family. I love my MGO. I have various different text groups of MGO women that I talk with. I went to
Yeah.
um, Colorado with Tammy over New Year's. I've
Mm-hmm.
traveled with others on cruises. And, then there's the 20% where I wake up and go,
Cool.
this is still my life. How did this happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, and it's hard for people that are watching that are new. That first year it's very hard. It really is. And I'd like to say that, it's not, but that grief just hits all sides of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult, but if you just hang in there, um, day by day, you'll start to get better. And I always hated people saying the second year was harder than the first, because it's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, well, thanks.
Right. Really
that
looking
gives,
forward to that.
that gives me a lot. Um, and I think it's deeper emotionally, because the shock and awe have somewhat worn off,
Yep.
but it's further apart for me anyway. If it's further apart, but at times the highs were higher, the lows were lowers, but they
Mm-hmm.
came less frequent.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of where I am now. So we'll
Yeah.
see where year 3 comes, but um, I'm
Do
very
you still
optimistic.
notice? Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Do you still notice a tendency to want to measure yourself in terms of your emotional experience and what it is versus what part of you thinks it should be?
Um, Not nearly as much, I would say,
Yeah.
and that's probably just been maybe over the last 3 months. I've come to a lot more peace with it is what it is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and life is what it is. We don't. I mean, you and I have worked very much on the control. I mean, my way through safety is controlling
Mm-hmm.
everything. And so I've just in the last few months kind of gotten a little bit where I can let that grip
Mm.
of needing to control everything go a little bit. So
What has helped you do that? And do you have any
um,
wisdom you can share about it?
honestly, I think it is just very consistent thought work,
Yeah.
and recognizing and reminding myself that ultimately, unfortunately, there isn't control. We only control ourselves, and sometimes we don't have control over what happens there
Mm-hmm.
either. But when I really think of perspective wife, it's like, well, yeah, nobody wants to be a victim of abuse. Nobody wants their child to be in danger or, any starvation, but we don't have control of those things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if I can recognize that, I kind of have to recognize in my own life that I can set goals and intentions, and I think that's great. And manifestation, I believe in all of that. But ultimately, um, I have to let go of the fact that safety and success is only when I control everything, and
Yes.
just deal with the fact that
It's a hard
sometimes
lesson to
crappy
learn
things happen
too.
to good people, and good things happen to crappy people.
Yes.
It is a
And
hard
it's
concept.
so hard when you think about like the hierarchy of needs. Like we need to feel safe to be able to pursue the self-actualization and all the other
Yeah.
stuff. And it's like such a pickle
Yeah.
when that
Yeah.
is the way you have found safety.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Can we circle back to the pleasure bit? Because
Uh-huh.
I feel like you're really good at this. At least
Mhm.
that's how I see you. Like you seem to be really good at scheduling time for yourself and doing fun things and taking
Mhm.
adventures. And I know that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people who are listening. Has that always been natural for you? Have you had to work at that? How do you like make those things a priority for yourself?
Um, I think that I did just grow up with a genuine love of travel. Now, we didn't travel internationally or anything. We didn't have the money of that, but camping, and I think the fact that I did grow up in very diverse, like from farmland, Kansas to Van Nuys, California. I always
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed seeing different people approaching things differently, and of different cultures. So it was always important to me that I set time aside to do those. And I always knew that I wanted our children to experience different lifestyles and not be pigeonholed into, this is all
Mm-hmm.
you know and everybody lives this way, because they don't. But I do think it was a lot to do with my real estate and the company that I work with at Keller Williams, the brokerage. And my real estate coach is very proactive on a balance of,
Mm-hmm.
work and business and finance, but also spiritual and personal. So
Mm-hmm.
literally setting money aside or time aside for things that bring you personal enjoyment. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I didn't think it was balanced because Darren and I worked very hard. I mean, we always did investment or personal properties, remodeling and all. And so, he worked a lot of hours, and, our pastime was remodeling houses. So it seemed like all we did was physical work, but we did
Mm-hmm.
always set time aside to mostly travel and take the kids or do game night or things. So it has literally always been an intention of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think somewhat lifestyle, but then through my coaching program with my business coach, a more mindful process to it.
Mm-hmm. How easy or difficult was it to keep those priorities after Darren died?
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't know for a fact I made the right choices, but now I think they served me well. But I know, very matter of fact, I mean, I had already had a trip planned for just 6 weeks or so after he died to Mexico for Mother's
Mm-hmm.
Day with my mom and my son. And, I think that, my inclination was to not go because I was in such grief. And I kind of made myself go. And I don't know for a fact if that was the right choice. I do sometimes wonder, it's like, was that good for my son or not good for my son?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just kind of felt like I literally did it because I was afraid if I didn't, I would get stuck. I was
Mm-hmm.
afraid to quit living life because I was afraid if I didn't keep living life, that I would get stuck and feel this way forever. So
Mm-hmm.
there were times I did things that I honestly didn't really enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
But I just reminded myself, you know where the airport is. You have a car, you can leave anytime you want.
Mm-hmm.
But so I just kept chipping away at things. And slowly I started to see that I started enjoying them more and
Mm-hmm.
more. But I did keep, doing hiking trips with my friends,
Mm-hmm.
going on vacations and spring break.
I'm
And
so I'm so glad I asked that question
yeah.
because, right? I mean, I think that's a useful thing to know. Like, not that it's really about was it the right or wrong choice necessarily, but just okay, sometimes I'm going to continue to make similar choices, and the fuel might be fear,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
also it might take me where I ultimately want to go, which
Right.
is to keep prioritizing these things that feel important to me, even if, the impetus is not, oh, let's go have fun and
Yeah.
pleasure is important. It's more like, no, actually, I'm feeling some fear and I'm afraid I'm going to stay stuck. And so I'm going to keep doing these things
Hmm.
so that I don't. I think that's a
Yeah,
great
you're
thing to
certainly
remind
not
ourselves of.
sitting on the beach in Mexico, 6 or 8 weeks after your husband passes and having the same experience you used to
Woo!
have. Yeah, that's
Yes.
not it. And yet there
Yeah.
also was a sense of peace that, and everybody's different on that too. I draw peace from things he and I had in common.
Mm.
And I know some widows, it's almost the opposite. They bring up the memories or the emotions are painful. But for
Hmm.
me, going to places we travel together, doing things we do together, I draw peace on that. So even though
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I was like having a vacation, I was at peace being with my son and my mother away from everything happening here,
Hmm.
and appreciating the beauty of the beach and the sunset and the simplicity of the people where I like to travel and the friendliness. So that
Hmm.
helped. But yeah, it was not exactly a joyful experience, but it met me where I needed to be somewhere else. And I am glad I did it. And I understand why some people can't do it because it's not always
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah, there's something to be said for just being present with yourself, even in a different environment, even if it doesn't look like joy all the time. Maybe there's some
Yeah.
joy in it, but it doesn't have to look like joy all the time. Just to be so valuable because you're present with whatever your experience is.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where you have to have your own back. And because I did go again, probably close to a year later and spent a couple weeks. And, friends came that traveled with Darren and I. And that's another thing. I mean, this is not just us as a family. I mean, this was
Mm.
traumatic for our
Mm-hmm.
friends and our community and his coworkers. So suicide is a very ripply effect that people
Yeah.
don't often see. Um, but I had to have my own back and say, there might be days that I don't come out until 12 or 1, or I don't come out at all. And my friends are
Mm-hmm.
like, that's okay. And at the same time, I don't want you feeling like you have to stay and take care of me. Go enjoy yourself. Go to the beach, have fun, but also have your own back that if you don't
Mm-hmm.
generally feel like doing something, you don't owe anybody an explanation. Just
Yeah.
they know.
Can you say more about what it's been like for you socially?
Hmm.
Because people did know you as a couple and,
Yeah. It's been a little strange. We have a very close group of friends. We've lived here for 20 years. We built this house and would do a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
Travel together, spend almost every weekend together, grew up, raised our kids together.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it, there would be times I would sit and I would think like, I feel like the third wheel because
Mm-hmm.
now all of a sudden my husband's gone and here I am, this couple of friends and this couple of friends, and we're doing what we used to do, going to dinner and going to the winery. So it did feel, and there's times where it feels, one of the moms described it as icky. There's these moments
Yeah.
of jealousy. You're
Mm-hmm.
looking, well, where's my husband? Why
Yeah.
do they get to continue as things were and I don't?
Mm-hmm.
So those are normal. Um, and yet I also am just so thankful that my friends stayed around and we did kind
Mm-hmm.
of continue life
Mm-hmm.
in a pretty normal way. And there are times we'll be there too where I'll look at, one of my good friends' husband and think he probably feels like a third wheel too, because I'm sure he's saying, where's my best friend?
Mm-hmm.
Here's Joe and Heather just chatting away and laughing, or Michelle and, you know, having a good time. And where's my friend?
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
It can be a really challenging experience. I'm glad for the most part it's been, more positive than not for you.
for me, it has.
Yeah.
But there are times where it's just a reminder of what's not there. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm having so many coaching sessions flash through my brain with other people of conversations that are similar,
mhm.
So yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I want to know, is there anything I missed or anything that you really wanted to talk about or you really want people to know?
I think we covered a lot of it. I think the only thing that maybe I definitely have a soft spot for, suicide loss survivors, because I think there's just so much misunderstanding there, and
Yeah.
letting them meet themselves where they need to be, and don't be afraid to be honest if you choose to, and if you don't, if there's embarrassment, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't do anything wrong. I don't know that they necessarily did anything wrong.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And I think the one other thing is just helping to change a little bit the stigma around suicide altogether, which to me encompasses mental and emotional health. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I love about your program, that it plays a little bit into that survivor's guilt, because there are times I will say, well, how dare you learn this at 54 and go on to have a good life?
Mm-hmm.
When, why didn't you know this and teach it to your husband? Why didn't you
Yep.
teach this to your kids when they were in grade school? Why didn't you? And you know it's not. So I do think as a society we can be more open to dialogues about emotional health earlier on, because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the resources we see for suicide is at the point of chaos crisis. you
Yes.
know People don't ask for help, they don't have access to help or resources until they're at the crisis point, and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately at that point it's too late for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And even the medical community, I don't think, views emotional and mental health the same as they view physical health. A lot
For
don't, some
sure.
do. So I think we need to change that, and I think that if we could provide more information earlier in life on these emotions, just like what I learned in your program. The
Yes.
less I fight the anger, the less I fight the sadness, the faster it processes, and there are tools to help process that. So I think if our kids learned that these emotions of shame and anger and embarrassment and loneliness are okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that, real boys and big girls don't just suck it up, you can
Right.
process them. That's, I think, when we'll actually start to see a decline in these catastrophic numbers that we're seeing on suicide loss. And I think that's what it's going to take.
I hope we're headed in that direction. I mean, I feel like maybe it's because of the work that I do and because I'm in it every day, it's easier for me to see how it's becoming a more normal conversation to have because it's more normal for me than it used to be. I don't know if my perception of that is skewed, but I sure am hopeful that, it's people like you, right? You come and you do the work and then you learn and then it ripples out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I'm like you. I think we're starting to see more, but just 2 years ago, I saw very little. So I think it is the bubble I'm in. But my hope is just that, my kids' generation is better at recognizing and processing emotions, and that they don't feel like that, that it's an embarrassment to say something's not right and I need help, or that, and let's face it, I mean, you are stigmatized and you are afraid you're going to pay more for insurance or lose your insurance or lose your job when you ask for help. That's so far been the course. And so
that part is going to take a while to overhaul.
Yeah. So I'm more vocal in hoping that my husband's friends, other people in the community that are where he is, and I don't know for a fact if he even saw it himself. I don't know. But hopefully they'll be able to ask for help and get it earlier. And then certainly as generations come up, then I'd like to see processing emotions be more of a natural part of our education. And I don't want to put it on the schools. They can't handle everything, but certainly if kids learn how this adrenaline and these feelings are normal because that's actually how your brain works, I think that, they would judge themselves less. And that's probably just as valuable as learning a moon cycle or, dissecting a frog.
Yes. So. Maybe more valuable. Some might argue. Jo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for being willing to be open and honest with people. I know it will help. And I'm gonna tell Sherry we had a full circle moment as you were talking about Sherry. It was like making me so emotional because I remember how I'm gonna cry now. Just think about like how dark it was for her.
Yeah.
And to like come and do all the work that she did. And then for you to hear that and for you to feel inspired by that and feel heard by that.
Yeah. And she even
really
drove
cool.
down and met me in Kansas City for a weekend. And it was transformative for me. It really was. And I was still kind of in a brief coma at that moment. So for her to do that, and those are the little things, I had a couple of widows here in town that just said, let's go to dinner. And this was very early on. And so just, if nothing else, just being able to reach out to someone and say, hey, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here. And
and it feels so good to be able to do that for someone when you remember how dark it felt. Yeah. Amazing. Well, I know people are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Sure. I appreciate you. I am so glad that you had the courage to, work on this program, because building a business isn't easy, and certainly when it's revolves around some very hard emotions.
Yeah, it's very true. And I also can't imagine doing anything else. So all right. Well, thank you, Jo, so much.
All right.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.